I'm going to begin now to develop something, a chart that we will be using throughout subnetting. I call this, by the way, the Z chart, and that is my own name. It's my own chart, and so since my name is Zimmerman, I call it the Z chart. I use this quite a bit in teaching subnetting, and I have for many years very successfully, so I continue to use it. Remember our old friend that we use for learning binary. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. Now, in reference to our Z chart, this is going to represent something. In fact, there's two different things that it's going to represent: increments and hosts. Now, I will explain this later, but it's going to represent the size of increments that we're going to use when we subnet. And it's also going to represent the number of hosts that we can get out of a network. Now, the caveat is you always have to subtract 2 when you're looking at the number of hosts. Okay, but for now, don't worry about that yet, because we're not going to get into that yet. I'm also going to make another row, and earlier you may remember in another video I recommended that you memorize these, and that is the possible subnet masks: 128, 192, 224, 240, 248, 252, 254, 255. Now all this is I've added, as I went across here, I added 128, and then I added another 64, and I added another 32, and I added another 16, and I added 8, and so on, all the way across. This is going to represent the subnet mask numbers. And again, you'll see how I use this a little later on. There's one more row that I want to introduce, and that is /25, /26, /27, /28, /29, /30, /31, /32. And this you may recognize as the CIDR, classless interdomain routing number. It means the same thing as the subnet mask, but it's expressed a little bit differently. It's the number of contiguous ones in a subnet mask. This whole thing all occurs at this point in the 4th octet. That is to say, we are going to pretend here, I guess, that we are working only in the 4th octet. In other words, I'm not subnetting in the 3rd octet when I'm using these numbers. Now, I know if you're lost at this point, don't worry about it, because I will pick this up and show you how I'm going to use it in a little bit. There is also a chart I use for the 3rd octet. Now, for the 3rd octet, I am not going to represent number I'm not going to represent the increment. I'm only going to show the number of hosts. And the number of hosts actually increases from here. So if this is 128, the next one will be over here at 256. And then 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, and so on. I'm not going to bother to fill the rest of these in, because at this point we're not going to be needing them. But if you were ever in a quiz or exam situation where you needed these, then I would suggest you go ahead and calculate these out and fill them in. The other thing we need over here, I don't need the subnet mask number because that's going to be the same but in a different octet. I am going to need the CIDR. numbers. So this one, if we're in the third octet, these would begin, well, they would end here with 24. They would begin with 17 slash 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So there's the third octet. Now the second octet. Again, I need hosts and CIDR. So the hosts would continue up here. And again, I'm not going to bother to count these. You could work them out if you need them. It's very rare that even on an exam that they're sadistic enough to make you work up in here. Although I've seen it maybe once or twice, but not often. And then the CIDRs, this would begin with 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Now, just to make these easier to sort of see, I'm going to go ahead and put these lines through here. All right. Now, how do I use this chart? Let's say that I have, we did this before, 192.168.0.0, and this one's going to be a 255.255.0.0. All right, so how many ones do I have here? Well, I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ones here and 8 ones here. So that's 16 ones. Where is that? Well, it's right at the end of the second octet, right? And look over here. Right at the end of the second octet, you'll see this /16. Or if you wish to look at it another way, you'll also see that we have not only /16 here, but 255 in the 255 up here in that is represented by the subnet mask, but we're in this one. So in the second octet we have a 255, and sure enough we have a 255 here, and then we have a 255 in the second octet. So right now we're working at this level. Now when I subnetted this 192.168.0.0 255.255.255.0. What do I do now that it's subnetted? How do I discover what increments I use in order to increment each network to find the next network address? And the answer is right here. I have 255 in the third octet, also known as /24. So I can use either one, but if I look here, I can see /24 is right here, or I can say that that is 255. Remember, this one up here is the only one that represents the subnet mask here. 255 in the third octet, like that. All right, so /24 or 255 in the third octet. And that's exactly what I have here. Now, what can I do with this chart? How does this help me? It helps me if I need to know how to create all of the networks. And I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to make a table. In here, in this first line here, and I'll go ahead and make some lines across it just to make it easier. This first one will be each network address. The second one will be the first usable host. Over here will be the last usable host. Over here will be the broadcast address. And over here will be the subnet mask. All right, let's let's begin here. If I have subnetted this, so now I'm here, right? And I have discovered that that means that I have a 255 in the third octet or a /24. There's the /24 right up here. Or 255 in the third octet. That's where /24 is. Let's begin with our network address. We know our first network address. 192.168.0.0. All right, fair enough. If that's the network address, then what's the first host address? 192.168.0.1. Now, what's the last address? Well, I don't really know yet because it's the one just before the broadcast address, and I don't know the broadcast address yet. So I have to figure that part out. So what I'm going to do is figure out what increment I need in order to create the next network. So in order to make the next network, what is the increment I need? Here again, I'm going to go up to the increments. Remember, I don't have any increment listings down here. I only have increments up here in the first one. So this 1 represents the increment. And in what octet am I going to increment it? For a /24, I'm in the third octet. Right? So I'm going to increment by 1 in the third octet. So here we go. 192.168.1.0. In fact, the next network after that, I'm going to increment by 1 in the third octet. So 192.168.2.0. The next one, 192.168.3.0. The next one, 192.168.4.0. And so on and so on. So by looking at this chart, I could see that for a /24, if I'm going to subnet down to a /24, I need to increment by 1 in the third octet because that's where /24 exists. Does that make sense? Well, I hope so. But now I can use this to get my broadcast address, because if this is the address of network 2, let me erase this here. And I'm going to say this is network 1. Let me put my pencil back here. Network 1. This is network 2, network 3, network 4. If this is the first network, if this is the second network, then the first network must end with the one before that. 192.168, what's before 0.1? Or 1.0? Sure, it's 0.255. 192.168.0.255. Well, if that's the broadcast address, which is the last address on the network, then the one before that must be the last usable host. 192.168.0.254. The only thing left now is to identify the subnet mask. Well, the subnet mask is, as we said, it's a /24. Or if you want to put it in terms of the subnet mask, we can do that. We have subnet mask listed up here, and it's a 255 in the third octet. Once again, we come down here, 255, and then we go across in the third octet. So 255.255.255.0. So our first subnet is all laid out for us. Now our second subnet, we can look at the third one in order to get the second one's broadcast address. So the one before 2.0 would be 1.255. 1.255. Which makes this 1.254. And by the way, this would be, if this is 1.0, this would be 1.1 would be the first address. All right, the one before 3.0 would be 2.255, which makes this 2.254. And by the way, if this is 2.0, then that makes the first address here 2.1, the first usable address. Now I've added one extra one here, even though I'm not going to carry this one out, just for accounting purposes. And I often do this. I call the next one, accounting, that I just put in there in order to get this information back here. If the next network would be 4.0, then the previous network would be 3.255. And the one before that, 3.254. And the one after 3.0 would be 3.1. Now, all of these are going to be /24s. Or 255, 255, 255, 0. I'll just make little IBID marks here. They're all 255, 255, 255, 0. Now, I used my chart to do this. Why did I use the chart? Well, because as we get in higher level types of subnetting, you'll find this chart very, very useful. Even though it's a little much right now, you could have done this without it. In fact, we did in the last video that I made. We did do it without it. But in the future, you'll find this extremely helpful.